Okay, good morning, kids. I'm sure most of you are delighted to see me. Well, this is, we've started e-learning classes at school for your benefit. So of late, I'm talking to A2 kids. Of late, we've been going to the Merchant of Venice. But today, what I've decided to do is I've decided to change gears, and I've decided to go through or walk you through this poem titled "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings" by Maya Angelou. This is a very inspiring poem, and but before we get into the details of this poem, we need to understand the historical background of the Afro-Americans who stay in America. So it's very important for us to look at this particular poem through the lens of their history and all that they've suffered in America. Okay, now to begin with, let me start with the institution or the system of slavery in America. Slavery as an institution, as a system, has existed for centuries. In fact, even before America became an independent nation in the year 1776. Slavery was practiced by ancient Greeks, ancient Romans. And how slavery came into the picture in America is because of a few factors, and the main reason being that America at that point of time, I'm talking about the 1800s, especially in the southern half of America, they had a lot of cotton plantations, they had a lot of sugarcane plantations, they had a lot of tobacco plantations, because of which they needed a lot of manpower. They needed a lot of labor, intensive labor to work. They needed a lot of manpower to work in those fields, because of which a lot of these traders or merchants, they traveled all the way to Africa. And there is the Atlantic Ocean, I'm sure you know that separates the Americas. I'm talking about both the South America as well as North America. So there was a thriving trade in humans, between Africa, especially West Africa, and the Americas. So what traders used to do was they used to go all the way to West Africa, and then they used to meet the tribal leaders. They used to induce them to give them slaves by offering them guns, by offering them alcohol, by offering them manufactured goods. And the tribal leaders in turn did supply them with a lot of manpower, with a lot of labor for the white people. So in fact, the tribal leaders too benefited from this trade, because they became richer and they procured guns from the whites, because of which they could go on raids to capture more slaves. In fact, the situation in Africa reached such a point, kids, that there was a lot of warfare, there was a lot of inter-tribal warfare, feuds happening in Africa at that point of time, with the primary intention or the primary focus or the goal being to capture as many slaves as they could. And then so we have this thing, let's say Africa is out here, you have this thing, America, North America here, then you have South America here. So a lot of people were transported all the way from Africa to the Americas. And so this journey is that the slaves undertook was known as the Atlantic slave trade. And the reason why I decided to actually tell you a bit about slavery in America is because it's important, because we need to understand, before we read this poem, we need to understand the history of the Afro-American people in America. So you can get a sense of their plight, you can get a sense of their suffering, you can get a sense of how these blacks or these Africans were dehumanized by figuring out, by coming to know. How is it that they were treated by the traders? How is it that they were treated by the captain and the crew of the ship that was responsible for transporting them all the way to America? So the conditions in the ships were very, very bad. These Africans were treated as commodities. They were not treated as human beings. They were packed packed like sardines below the decks, and there was no sanitation. They were provided meager rations of food, and if they were not healthy enough, or if they could not endure or tolerate or survive that journey, or if they fell sick, they were simply thrown overboard. And when they reached the shores of America, they were the able-bodied men, the women and the children who survived this particular journey. They were made to they were branded, and they were auctioned to the highest bidder. And once they were auctioned to the highest bidder, these slaves or these Africans became the property of their masters. So now just think about how these Africans must have felt. Imagine being severed or being separated from your community, from your land, from your people, and then to be transported to a strange land with whites whom many of them perhaps had never seen before in their lives, and then to be branded and auctioned, and from thenceforth for their lives to be lived as servants who had to obey every instruction of their masters. I'm sure that must have been very, very difficult. And even after they were auctioned, it's not that, for example, let's say if a family were taken as slaves and they were transported all the way to America, it's not that they were sold together to one slave owner. It could be the case that they would be separated, and they could be sent to different slave owners. So even after that, life while they worked in the plantations, these sugar plantations, these cotton plantations, these tobacco plantations, life was very, very difficult for them. They were treated like animals. They were given food that probably even animals wouldn't eat. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but they were punished, they were flogged, they were whipped for minor offenses. They did not have legal rights. They could not speak out against their master. Even if they were brutally tortured, they were treated very, very badly. Despite that, they had no recourse to justice. And the slave owners and their family could do what they wanted to do with these Africans. So they were subjugated, they were oppressed, they were treated badly, they were discriminated against. Their lives were hellish in those plantations, and so there was no outlet for them where they could vent their grievances. And so after a point of time, the institution of slavery became a problem in the United States of America, because the Constitution of America, it clearly states that all men are born equal. But here there was this deep contradiction in American society itself, where you had a huge group of people who were treated like second-class, not even second-class citizens, they were just treated like animals. So there was this huge contradiction in American society, and a lot of people, they awoke to this injustice. They realized that things were not right, and so which eventually resulted in the Civil War. I'm sure you must have read a bit about the Civil War in your history classes. And in the Civil War, basically what happened was the Union forces fought with the Confederate forces. So the Union forces, they comprised many northern states, and the Confederate forces, they comprised many southern states. Now for the southern states, they were pro-slavery. They wanted slavery as a system, as an institution to exist, because it supported their economy. Remember that slavery was the backbone of their economy. So they were vehemently against, they were fiercely against any talk about abolishing slavery. A lot of, so that, I think the war took place between the years 1861 and 1865. I hope I'm correct. After which the Emancipation Proclamation was declared by Abraham Lincoln, and then after that the 13th Amendment, there was a 13th Amendment of the US Constitution, after which slavery was officially abolished in the United States of America. And I will just, you can get a sense of the friction that was there in American society at that point of time by the fact that Abraham Lincoln himself was assassinated because of this particular issue, because of the feeling that the southern states and that gentleman who killed him had about his support against the institution of slavery. So now we get the idea, we are under the, we'll probably feel that, okay, fine, so now it was legally abolished, it was legally banned because of the 13th Amendment. But remember that Americans probably could never get out this feeling of racism and discrimination and prejudice that they had towards or against the the blacks. Okay, so now we will not use the word blacks because the word blacks is considered a bit derogatory, is considered a bit insulting. So I will use the word Afro-Americans. So so now that was all about slavery. So this was the starting point of the bad treatment that the Africans received at the hands of the white Americans. So now we'll call them Afro-Americans. So now, even after the abolition of the institution of slavery, racism means discriminating against people on the basis of the color of their skin. Prejudice, discrimination prevailed in American society, and it still prevails to this day. And in fact, just to shed some more light on it, people try to justify slavery. In this time and age that we are living in, we are aware of human rights, and plus the world has become, the world in general has become a lot more liberal, and we do understand inherently, we don't even need anyone to tell us that slavery is wrong. We do understand that slavery is just not right. It is just not moral. But there were a lot of advocates, there were a lot of people who endorsed slavery, who actually put forth theories to support slavery. They said that it's according to the divine order of things, and that was one justification. The other justification was that slaves, they did not know how to run their own lives, and they were in a system that was a lot better off than the societies back in Africa. And in fact, they also quoted the scriptures, they cited the scriptures. When I talk about the scriptures, I'm talking about the Bible. They said stuff like Abraham too actually had slaves. So if Abraham, the father figure of three religions, Islam, Christianity and Judaism, if that guy had slaves, why couldn't they have slaves? Number one. Number two is, in fact, they also spoke about the New Testament, how Paul, when he returned this runaway slave Philemon to his master, Christ actually had nothing to say about it. In fact, during the Roman times, there was so much of slavery. Slavery as an institution was prevalent, was very much entrenched, or was very much there in Roman society. But despite that, when Jesus was alive, he actually said nothing about slavery. So people, slavery or about slaves. So people try to justify slavery, but now we know that slavery as an institution is not right. And so slavery gradually, slavery was abolished, but then people couldn't quite get over the fact that according to the law, the Afro-Americans too had equal rights. So this feeling of prejudice was very much there in the minds of the American people, and it continued to exist, and it continues to exist even today. Okay, so having said that, let me just also talk a bit about Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou is a very gifted writer. She's inspiring, and a lot of her works are the result of deep pain that she had to encounter through her childhood days. She was born in Missouri, but unfortunately her parents, as in their marriage was very troublesome. It wasn't a very, their relationship, the relationship of of her parents wasn't affectionate. So because of which she, along with her brother, had to move to their grandmother's place, paternal grandmother's place. And the paternal grandmother had a store, and she was okay compared to the other slaves in that area. She was pretty, I'll not say she was well-to-do, but she managed just fine. And then she had a very traumatic, she underwent a very traumatic incident when she was barely 8 years old, because of which she actually did not speak with anyone for approximately 5 years. And she, in her memoir, she actually credits those 5 years with the development of her own maturity. And fortunately for her, and just think about it, we are talking about, she was born in the year 1928, so we are talking about the 30s and the 40s. Okay, so in the 30s and the 40s, in the southern half of America, there was still a lot of racial discrimination, and Maya Angelou was already an Afro-American, and combined with that, or coupled with that, she was a woman. So I'm sure it must have been very tough for her. So at that point of time, and remember, she's also written this autobiography, or a book. There is actually a book titled I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, where she talks about how she would rather, or how young girls at that point of time preferred to have been born fair with blue eyes and blonde hair. And so she went through a lot of discrimination. She had to move from house to house, so she suffered a lot. And then she came across a very kind lady. Her name was Mrs. Esther Flowers, who taught her how to read and write, and who also introduced her to writers like Shakespeare, Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Dickens. And it was at that point of time that I'm talking this 5-year hiatus where she did not speak. It was at that point of time that she developed a love for literature, she developed a love for poetry, and she sought in these an outlet for all her frustration, her sense of injustice, etc. And later on in life, she went on to win a lot of accolades. She was very versatile. She was a writer, she was a producer, she was a director, and she was closely associated with the civil rights movement. In fact, she actually personally she knew and helped the two leading stalwarts of the leaders, the tallest leaders of the civil rights movement, one being Martin Luther King Jr. and the other being Malcolm X, I'm sorry, I apologize. Anyway, I would also suggest that you go through the biography of Martin Luther King Jr. and the biography of Malcolm X, because both of them wanted equality for the Afro-Americans in America, but their approaches were very, very different. In fact, I would suggest that you read this book written by Malcolm X titled The Autobiography of Malcolm X. I would love to talk to you about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., but unfortunately there is a time constraint. So we can talk about it later on when you kids come back from home. But okay, fine. So Maya Angelou again. So she's no longer alive. She is no longer with us. She passed away in the year 2014, and her poems, her works have inspired leaders. They've inspired musicians. They've inspired artists. And if you want to know examples, I can give you examples. Like she has been cited as a source of inspiration by contemporary artists like Nicki Minaj, Kanye West, and even Tupac, who is someone whose music I listen to a lot. She was his inspiration as well. And she also mentored Oprah Winfrey as well. And so there are a lot of details. For example, she actually read aloud her poem titled On the Pulse of Morning during Bill Clinton's inauguration. And so all these details are something that you'll find in your workbook. These details are something you'll find in your guidebook. So I want you, so the Afro-Americans, remember a few points. So their ancestors were slaves. Okay, so the reason why I decided to actually dwell or discuss in brief slavery was because for one to get a proper appreciation and understanding of this particular poem, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, you have to have a certain understanding of where is it that these Afro-Americans come from and the sufferings of their ancestors. So having said that, what we can do, so okay, so fine, then what we can do is now we can just go through the. Okay, so now before we start this poem, please do bear in mind that the Afro-Americans, they've had a very, very troubled past in America, and not only that, they are still at the, remember, they are still at the receiving end of a lot of hatred, a lot of discrimination, a lot of prejudice at the hands of the white Americans. So now we will start this poem, and remember that we have this time constraint, so I'll be quick. So, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. In fact, this particular line has been taken from Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem titled Sympathy. Okay, so now we will, I will start explaining the poem. I'll start explaining the poem to you. I will run you through the poem. But before we start, I just want you to bear in mind that the Afro-Americans, they've had a very troubled history, a very painful history. Plus, they continue to still suffer from discrimination at the hands of the white Americans. So having said that, let me start explaining or going through the poem with you. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. First of all, the thing that you need to remember about this title is that, okay, first of all, there is this book that Maya Angelou has written. So it's like a memoir. It's like an it's a loose autobiography that she's written. And the memoir, the autobiography that she's written too is titled I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And this is another poem of hers which is titled I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Now this particular line has been taken from Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem titled Sympathy, and if you read that poem Sympathy, and I would suggest you read that poem, this particular line has been taken from the third stanza, and that particular poem too is against the discrimination that the Afro-Americans faced in America. So anyway, so the first stanza, we'll start with the first two stanzas. So the first stanza reads like this: a free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream and dips its wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. Okay, now before I begin, remember that the caged bird is a metaphor, and it's a metaphor of what? It's a metaphor for all the Afro-Americans who are treated badly by the American system, and not only by the American, well, I'll not say the American system, I mean to say there are laws in place that promote equality, but despite that, generally in America, the whites have and continue to treat the blacks in a rude way, in a harsh way, in a in a way that discriminates against them. So caged bird is a metaphor for the Afro-Americans who live in America, and free bird is suggestive of, or it's a free bird is a metaphor for the white Americans. So the first verse itself is a beautiful evocation of a free bird flying in the sky. So a free bird leaps or jumps on, so you have to form an image in your mind. So she starts with a visual imagery, a beautiful image or description of a free bird soaring and flying wherever it likes in the sky. So a free bird leaps on the back of the wind, rides on the back of the wind and floats downstream. So imagine there's a body of water flowing this way. So you have the bird, it flies with the wind, and whichever course that stream or water body takes, it glides just over the water body till the current of that water body ends, and floats downstream and dips its wings. So it dips its wings in the orange sun rays. Obviously, I mean to say, if it's orange sun rays in the sense the water body is reflecting the rays of the sun. That's the reason why we have, so in the sense, so that's so the images of a bird flying with the wind downstream till the point where the stream ends, probably at the mouth of the river or the mouth of the sea, and followed by it dipping its wings, okay, in the water body, that's reflecting the glare, the orange glare, the orange shimmer, the orange glare of the sun. So it's shimmering with orange light, and it dares to claim the sky. So for the free bird, or for the white American living in America, he has plenty of opportunities. So for the free bird too, so to begin with, if the free bird is riding with the wind, okay, that goes on to show how favorable the circumstances are for this bird. And also remember that for a bird to fly and to roam around freely in the sky, it's the natural thing for it to do. And the free bird, which again is suggestive of the white American, also dares to claim the sky, in the sense, this probably is an example of hyperbole out here. Dares to claim the sky. No one can dare to claim the sky because the sky is so immense, the sky is so vast, the sky is immeasurable. But despite that, the sense of it being, it asserts its right over the entire sky. So the sense that we get from the first verse is that it's the circumstances for the free bird, the circumstances are favorable, number one, and it is happy, it's joyous, and because it's free. And so having said that, let's move on to the second stanza. So now the poet effectively uses contrast to highlight or to underline the difference between the free bird and the bird that's confined in a cage. So this, the bird that's being referred to out here basically is suggestive of the Afro-Americans that live in America, and the system that confines them, the system that does not let them grow to their full potential. So this, so let's just walk you through. I just want to walk you through this particular line. So you have to form an image of a bird it's very simple to form that image of a bird that's confined within the bars of its cage, and but a bird that stalks on the back of the wind can seldom see through its bars of rage. Can I start? But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage. Now look at the word stalks here. What is the meaning of the word stalks? It means moves around here and there with a deep sense of frustration and pain and agony. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom through his bars of rage. Okay, so now seldom see through his bars of rage, in the sense the space that it has to move around is not a lot, and for the bird, for the free bird which is moving in the sky, it has access to so much of space and probably so many opportunities, unlike the bird that's in the cage, whose vision is limited, who can't quite see beyond the narrow, who can't quite see a lot, for whom the world itself has been restricted because of the cage that it finds itself in. Now, who has put the bird in the cage? Obviously, human beings put birds in cages. Now, who has actually put the Afro-Americans in this condition? So, this poem suggests that it is the white man or the white American who is responsible for putting this bird in this cage, or the Afro-American in this particular situation. Afro-American in this particular situation. So he can seldom see through his bars of rage. Now, bars of rage is another metaphor. So those are simple bars that are around the cage. So this can also be seen as the hatred that the white man has for the the Afro-American. So those bars of rage means a lot of anger. So those bars that have been constructed reveal or indicate to us the hatred and prejudice that the white man has for the Afro-Americans. And if you look at it from the other way around, to the bird that's in the cage, to the Afro-American who finds himself in such a situation, a part of such a system where he's discriminated against, what feelings do you think that bird has, or what feelings do you think that the Afro-American possesses? Well, I'm sure he will be angry, he will be frustrated, there'll be a deep sense of hopelessness, despair in him. So the bars can be looked at from 2 points of view. I feel that's my reading of this particular line. It can be seen as the hatred that the white man has for the Afro-Americans, the prejudice that he harbors in his mind against the Afro-Americans, and it also can be seen as the deep sense of frustration and fear and anxiety and despair that the Afro-Americans feel in that particular situation. So its wings are clipped and his feet are tied. So this particular line, his wings are clipped and his feet are tied, further go on to show or tell us the inhumanity of the white man. Because the bird is already confined in the cage and obviously the bird can't move around. But that was not enough for the white man, or that wasn't enough for the person who kept the bird in the cage, who imprisoned or confined the bird in the cage. What that person ended up doing was, it ended up clipping its wings and also ended up tying its feet. So clipping its wings and tying its feet, in the sense the Afro-Americans, they don't have opportunities, and in fact earlier on, for a long time in their history, the white Americans were not supportive of their desire to study and educate themselves, because they felt that if the Afro-Americans or if the blacks, they educated themselves, or if they became literate, then they would oppose so I think I've gone I'm referring to the institution of slavery now. At that point of time, the Afro-Americans, they were not encouraged to become literate, because the white Americans, they felt that if that were to be the case, then they would rebel against their masters. So now that is I just spoke about slavery. Now let's jump forward to the 20th century, and its wings are clipped and its feet are tied. So the blacks had to face a lot of discrimination, and you might ask me, kids, what kind of discrimination are you speaking about, sir? Well, discrimination in the sense that there was a lot of segregation. In fact, all the blacks, they had to study in one school. There was a separate school for blacks, there was a separate school for whites. They had, when they traveled by train, they had separate compartments, and they had public restrooms were segregated. They had separate sections for whites. They had separate sections for Afro-Americans, and they were not given good opportunities, and they suffered from food insecurity. They also had problems related to housing, and they could not get access to high-paying jobs, and the areas where they lived in were full of crime, and the standard of living in general of the Afro-Americans wasn't that good, and they attributed it and they blamed the policies of the American system, the American government. Not only that, but they also felt that the white man or the Americans haven't really gotten over their prejudice against them. So its wings are clipped and its feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. So in such a situation where it's confined, where it's not where it's confined and where it's not given its freedom. What can the bird do? Well, the bird can do, and the Afro-American can there is so much that I would like to tell you, and what we will do is we will continue this poem in the next class.